Oh, hey, I'll be right with you. I just got to finish my Valentine's message. I think you're ugly and your mother dresses you funny. Hate you, mean it. Bye. I'll just drop that off at the post office later on. Let's say it's February 14th, sometime in the 1800s, and there's a knock at the door, and the postman is standing there with an envelope. You pay your penny because in the 19th century, the receiver often paid the postage, and then you open the card. Inside is a caricature of a woman with a large nose and a sour expression, and beneath it is a poem. "'Tis all in vain your simpering looks, you never can incline with all your bustle, stays, and curls to find a Valentine." And you paid a penny to read that. Welcome to the Vinegar Valentine, the Victorian tradition of anonymous insult cards sent on the most romantic day of the year. And in America, it began, as so many things in American commercial history began, in New England. In Worcester, Massachusetts, in 1847, a young woman named Esther Howland received an English Valentine card, and she was enchanted by it. Lacy, feathery, sumptuous, a beautiful object made of paper and ribbon and delicately applied decorations. She decides she can make something like it, better even. So she begins making elaborate valentines in her father's stationery shop, selling some for as much as $50 each in the 1850s. She assembles a small team of friends and relatives to help with the production, and she becomes one of the first women in America to run a successful commercial enterprise of that scale. Esther Howland of Worcester, Massachusetts, helped create the American Valentine's Day card industry. We can love her or hate her for that. The lacy, sentimental, romantic Valentine she popularized is the direct ancestor of every greeting card aisle you have ever stood in, slightly panicked, at 5:45 p.m. on February 14th. You know who you are. And almost immediately, alongside the beautiful cards, came the other kind. The Vinegar Valentine, called a mock Valentine or comic Valentine in its own era. The vinegar label is a much later one. It was exactly what it sounded like, an insulting card sent anonymously on Valentine's Day to someone you disliked. Not always a message between lovers or even former lovers, though sometimes it was. Just as often, it went to an annoying neighbor, an overbearing employer, a snobbish acquaintance, a postman who had offended you, a doctor who charged too much, or a shopkeeper who had been rude. They were cheap. A single sheet of paper, folded and sealed, printed with a caricature and a rhyming insult. Where the romantic Valentine was lacy, sentimental, and expensive, the vinegar Valentine was crude, pointed, and almost disposable, which is probably where most of them ended up. And often, the same companies made both the love card and the hate card, made on the same presses, sold side by side in the same shops, sometimes by Esther Howland's own competitors in Worcester, Massachusetts. Here's the detail that makes the Vinegar Valentine perfectly, diabolically clever. In the 19th century, before prepaid postage became standard, the receiver often paid for the letter. The postman arrived at your door with the envelope, and you paid the penny before he handed it over. Only then could you see what was on the inside. So the sender of the Vinegar Valentine paid nothing other than the cost of the cheap card. They wrote the insult, they addressed the envelope, they left it at the post office, and went home. The receiver, with no idea what was coming, paid the penny, opened the card, and read the insult they had just purchased. Insult added to injury. The injury was the card, and the insult was the penny. By the 1870s, as many as 750,000 insulting Valentines were reportedly being sent every year in the United States alone, which means hundreds of thousands of people paid a penny to be informed that their nose was too large, their cooking was terrible, and nobody will ever want to marry them. Now, the Vinegar Valentine was not random, it was targeted. There was a card for almost every social type that 19th century New England might have found objectionable. The old maid, the woman who had not married and was presumed to be desperate and pathetic, she received more Vinegar Valentines than almost any other category. Her nose was too large, her manner was too sharp, nobody wanted her. The cards made sure she knew it. The aging bachelor must settle down sometime, but won't throw himself away too early, one card read. The bachelor who was too selective or too lazy or too set in his ways to commit. The drunk, the gossip, the flirt, the miser, the spendthrift, the vain woman, the nagging wife, the henpecked husband, the incompetent doctor called Dr. Suredeath on one card, who ran up expensive bills and cured nobody, the rude shopkeeper, the stupid postman. There was a Vinegar Valentine for everyone who has ever annoyed you, which meant there was a Vinegar Valentine for almost everyone. Words like we and us and everyone appeared frequently in the insults, suggesting that the sender wanted the recipient to know that this was not merely a private grievance. No, no, it was a community judgment. Not, I hate you. Worse than that, we all hate you. By the end of the 19th century, the Vinegar Valentine had found a new target, the suffragette. As the women's suffrage movement grew, as women organized, marched, spoke, and demanded the right to vote, Vinegar Valentine manufacturers saw an opportunity. Cards depicting suffragettes as ugly, aggressive, mannish, deluded. One announced, "Your vote for me you will not get. I do not want a preaching suffragette." Yeah, his rhyming was a little off. These suffragette cards were not merely personal insults, they were political weapons, small, cheap, anonymous, and mailed on Valentine's Day to women who had committed the offense of wanting to participate in democracy. And it's worth noting that the woman who helped create the American Valentine industry, Esther Howland of Worcester, who built a business from scratch, employed other women, and created one of the first female-run commercial enterprises in New England, would have been precisely the kind of capable, independent woman the suffragette Vinegar Valentine was designed to mock. In February 1866, the New York Times declared that Vinegar Valentines were producing what it called a fearful tendency to the development of swearing in males of all ages. Profane swearing, which, as we have discussed on this channel, was illegal in parts of 1850s New England. Apparently, sending a Vinegar Valentine was worth the fine. But the consequences went further than swearing. Contemporary newspapers and memoirs describe fistfights, court cases, at least one suicide, even attempted murder. In 1885, a husband shot his estranged wife in the neck after receiving a Vinegar Valentine he recognized as being from her. Now, the press on both sides of the Atlantic condemned the cards with considerable moral outrage. They were described as filthy and nauseating. They were blamed for the coarsening of public life. They were said to be ruining Valentine's Day, which had supposedly been a noble Christian tradition before commerce got hold of it and turned it into an excuse for anonymous cruelty. The manufacturers were blamed, the newly literate public who could afford these cheap items was blamed, and everybody was blamed. The cards kept being sent. The most extreme case was what newspapers called the Fatal Valentine of 1847. A woman in New York City received a Vinegar Valentine from a man who had led her to believe he was romantically interested in her. The card made clear that he was not. She overdosed on laudanum and died. A card, an anonymous card, a penny's worth of cruelty on Valentine's Day, and a woman was dead. The newspapers were horrified. The moral outrage intensified, and still the cards kept being sent for another century. The Vinegar Valentine eventually fell out of fashion. By the end of the 19th century, enthusiasm had begun to fade. Critics blamed manufacturers for commercializing what they believed should have been a sacred romantic holiday. The beautiful lacy cards that Esther Howland had pioneered were reclaiming Valentine's Day from the vinegar end of the market. The last vinegar valentines were circulating in the 1940s. Some survived into the 1970s, and then they were gone, or almost gone. Because the impulse, the anonymous insult, the public shaming, the community judgment delivered to somebody's door without a name attached, that impulse has not disappeared. We just do it differently now. Now we have social media. Yay. On February 14th, 1847, though, somewhere in Massachusetts, a woman may have opened a Valentine and found a caricature and a rhyme. She'd paid a penny for it. The penny went to the post office. The insult came from someone who preferred not to sign their name. And in Worcester, Massachusetts, around that same time, Esther Howland was making beautiful lacy valentines in her father's stationery shop, building the business that would help define American Valentine's Day forever. The love and the loathing, both commercial, both mailed on the same day, both in their way, deeply human, for better or for worse. I'll see you again somewhere in time.